Welcome to the IRET Radio Videocast and Podcast, Tuesday, Dreich Licht. My name's Stuart Lochhead. We've got the regular guys here today. We've got Norrie Stewart.
Hi.
Phil Attridge.
Hi.
And Jimmy Hutton.
All right.
Welcome to the show, guys. So today we're going to start off by having a go at the media, the Herald, BBC, mainstream media, and how they're letting the country down. We'll have a word about an idea put forward by BarrheadBoy and a letter by Joanna Cherry in the Irish Times should keep us going for 3/4 of an hour. Who'd like to start with the media?
Well, there was a piece in the Herald today. I'm not sure if it was a typo, but the ONS have produced figures that have projected the number of people in each of the home nations that have got COVID. So 1 in 8 in England, 1 in 8.9 in Scotland, 1 in 10 in Wales, 1 in 11 in Northern Ireland. So the worst figure is England, followed by Scotland, followed by Wales, followed by Northern Ireland. But when you look at the actual figures on a daily basis, it's Ireland, Wales, England, Scotland. And it turns out these figures are from the ONS, they're projections, and they're a couple of weeks old. Why would you do that when you have up-to-date figures? I mean, the mainstream media have been screaming for figures on everything, including the number of bloody nose hairs you've got as an average on every COVID parent.
That's a state secret in my house.
Well, no, I took a look at that and thought, oh, are the Herald really showing their colours this far ahead of an election? Because it's usually the Tories who take a set of figures that fit their narrative and build a whole story around it. That's the Tory way to do things. Normally, you'd expect slightly better of the Herald. But it's almost embarrassing the way that they've done that, but particularly when, of all people, Kieran Andrews in the Times had a piece on Saturday congratulating the Scottish Government for halving the amount of infections from Boxing Day to Friday last week. It was down at 7.5% of tests at that point. And the Times, as the paper of record, is the last people that you'd expect to be congratulating the Scottish Government, which makes the Herald's piece all the more embarrassing, in my opinion.
Or necessary.
Maybe, aye.
The Herald's always been a right-wing unionist rag. Always had.
Wow.
Well, you had a wee spit where it had the Sunday, right? Where the editor and it was actually the predecessor to the National. And then they decided they couldn't hack having the Herald being slightly left-wing or any kind of wing, and they whipped it away, and you got the National. The Herald's always been a right-wing Tory unionist rag.
But they always had a couple of writers.
A couple of decent writers, but that's just to drag others in and get the money off. It's a right-wing rag, seen it, yeah. So
look, you guys are shading around, or skirting around the thing that's really got me angry, which is the fact that UK is now the most infectious place in the world as far as this pandemic is concerned. And why are the people of this country not being told this by our media? The media are being criminally irresponsible, not informing the public that this is the most infectious place to live in the world.
Sorry, Stuart, as the MSN representative, vaccines.
Yeah, well, that's the story they're pushing. But I'm sorry, you won't, if you die before the vaccine letter even arrives, you're screwed, aren't you?
Can I give you a big example?
We're not complaining. So.
This is COVID related, right? But a wee example of the right-wing bias, and actually with some of them thick, I'm talking about Kaye Adams, on Radio Scotland. And she was sitting there and going on about how great as in Israel has vaccinated more of the population against COVID than any other country. When one of the speakers, a medical person, mentioned the issue that no Palestinians had received the vaccine yet, she very quickly shut him down. We won't discuss that this morning if you don't mind. I mean, sorry.
So who brought up the top? Who was this a sponsored topic by Kaye Adams? Did she decide to bring this topic up about Israel?
It came up on Israel, yeah. It came up, and she had and it wasn't people on the phone. It was, you know, on a Zoom or whatever they were doing, and they were discussing how great Israel was. But of course, as we all know, Palestinians don't exist.
So that also ignores one of the reasons that Israel had to put all their energy into this vaccination program was because it was one of the most infected places in the world.
Yeah.
Vaccines, but vaccines.
You're allowed to talk about the vaccination success of Israel. You're certainly not allowed to talk about the Zionist apartheid that operates within that state. And frankly, the only reason that Israel has been in any way successful is that they're a comparatively rich country that's bought a lot of vaccine and has a massive military with which to do the logistics to get it out to the people that they want to jab. And the people that they want to jab aren't Arabs.
Yeah. It's all right.
About vaccines. Sorry.
You're getting good at that, Norrie. You're getting
Just
very
another
good
way of killing them, that's all.
Well, lads, I really don't think we should be criticising the press because, you know, vaccine.
Yeah. Well, I'll be your agent, Norrie, and I'll have a word with the editor of the Sun in a minute.
I do wonder if Boris's cheerleaders who are busily shouting Abbott vaccines louder and longer than Norman has, I wonder if they're getting moved up the list. You know, I wonder if they've suddenly become key workers.
I like that. What's floating about just now is, because we've got to talk about vaccines, is that nobody's throwing them away now. Apparently there was a missive issued that nobody was to get a second vaccine until everybody had their first, kind of idea. But if you've got spare, you know how some of these bottles contain 5 vaccines, but they're really 6. Mm-hmm. Some have got 10 on the label, but are really 11. And the press have been banging on about wastage. So it seems that, surprisingly, I mean, you'll be amazed to know this, but our GPs and medical staff have gone, oh, we'll just use that then.
Well, I was going to say, do you remember when you could fly standby? That's an old thing. If you're young, you won't even know what I'm talking about. But you could just hang about the airport on the chance of getting a very cheap flight somewhere. Well, can I not just hang about their GP surgery just in case?
No. Because you might be riddled with it, and everybody that walks past you that actually has an appointment to get vaccinated could catch it off you.
Well, I mean, it'll work on the big hubs and things.
Well, there's your thing. Mass vaccination. If and when that happens, then the wastage will be even less. And the press were busily pointing out wastage was 5%, which is a nonsense. I think Nicola pointed out yesterday it's less than 1%. So
that's the expected planned for wastage, according to the World Health Organization.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be.
But fortunately, the medical professionals who are actually doing it are applying common sense, and it's nowhere near what the accepted level of WHO is.
Yeah.
So we had another topic that we wanted to talk about. BarrheadBoy, also known as Roddy McLeod, came up with a plan which he published. Was it yesterday or earlier this morning? Certainly published. And he's a proponent of turning this up-and-coming May election into a plebiscite. In other words, what figure does the SNP have to reach for it to count as a plebiscite to negotiate independence? It's more than a majority they want. Is it a majority of seats?
They would have to, there's 129 seats at Holyrood. They would have to win 130 for it to count as that's the bottom line. Yeah. They would actually have to get more seats than they can get for it to count as a plebiscite.
Well, let's put it this way. He did put explained in the line above that for it to be recognised by the international community, generally speaking, referendums are a rare rare method to get your independence. But a plebiscite based on a referendum with the right, he is suggesting himself, I think 2/3 would almost certainly have no problem if you had 2/3 of the.
Well, that's
2/3 of the votes or 2/3 of the seats.
81 seats.
Both of which are impossible for the SNP to reach, I'd suggest.
No, it's not.
The SNP are not going to win. They're not going to get 67% of the vote, and they're not going to get 80 odd seats.
It's not all about the SNP. There are other groups that believe in independence. If they want to get a constitutional 90 odd seats, then they do not stand on the list. They let people on the Greens, they'll get about 30 seats, the Greens, plus the 60 odd into the 90s, but they won't do that because they're all politicians.
The Greens will never get 30 seats.
On the list, if the SNP weren't on the list, of course they would.
No.
Nonsense.
No, they won't.
The SNP vote wouldn't transfer to Green, Phil. I didn't trust Paddy Harvey and the freak shows round about him as far as I could kick them. That wee ginger boy, he shouldn't be anywhere near public politics.
There's another 30 odd percent, they reckon, of Labour voters that are going to switch. Sorry, yeah, I know a lot of them aren't too bright, but I'm sure they can manage to SNP 1, Green 2. That's the whole point.
No.
It's all about infighting, kicking
No.
each other, and
No.
Stop it.
It's nothing to do with infighting, Phil. The reality is, the SNP are a political party. Why are you asking them not to stand in an election?
Well,
That's what you're asking by saying that you're assuming that they win almost every seat on the first past the post system, and they should hand every seat. As a Democrat, why would you suggest that a proportional parliament should be gerrymandered to be unproportional to the result?
No, it's not gerrymandered. It's actually looking at the system and working it to your advantage. The last election in 2017, they got 4 seats from the list. Because they're that much in first past the post and the way this system, they won't get any more this seats.
Hold it, they got 11 in 2011.
They got
At that point, the list, the hunt system worked brilliantly.
I think what you have to remember is that the Labour Party gerrymandered the system to suit when they brought the PR system in. I think we have to keep that in mind. So Phil's lot are quite happy to gerrymander.
Well, it actually works. It was designed to stop one party, i.e. the SNP, getting a majority. Okay?
No,
that's
why
they did it. But
no, it wasn't. That's nonsense, Phil.
They were that stupid they never noticed 2 parties working in conjunction, one first past the post and one on the list, can do it.
Well, it was never designed to stop the SNP because the SNP, Labour never thought in their wildest dreams, wildest nightmares, that the SNP would ever poll at 40 or 50%. It was designed to guarantee Labour were always in power with the help of the Lib Dems.
Same difference.
No, I think I agree with
no, it's not,
I agree with Jimmy
the
there.
same difference, mate. It was never designed to stop the SNP because your mob would never have expected the SNP to poll this highly. Even, I mean, let's be honest, at that point, you'd been screwing the British public, the Scottish public in particular, for 80 years, and you were still winning the elections by the bucket load in Scotland.
By the way, Phil, are you going to stop your direct debit if Monica Lennon gets to be leader?
Monica Lennon, no. But she won't.
What about Anna Sarwar?
Cheerio.
Well, look, I'm going to stir the pot again, because immediately before, in his preamble, Roddy McLeod, BarrheadBoy, made a statement that he says here, the most recent polling shows support for independence at 58%. It could climb to 70 or 80%. So this is the ground on which he's suggesting the method of a plebiscite election for May. But yesterday's poll had the yes at only 51%.
Yeah. And therein lies your problem.
don't think it's got anything to do with Scottish nationalists kicking 10 bells out of each other, and they're all going, "I can't be bothered with this lot."
Actually, I don't.
You know,
I think it's got to do with a 3%, what do you call it, margin.
Martins.
As long as we're polling 3% ahead of no, fine. Or 4.
Well, the particular polling company that he used has never produced a result higher than 52% for yes. So 51% isn't a bad result. I would take it alongside other polls. Frankly, that just drags down the poll polls a bit. But the poll polls, when we get to the end of January, will still be sitting at about 55, 56%.
And the other thing to remember, Phil, is the Sturgeon Salmond thing hasn't really been front page.
No, it's been, I just get the feeling it's been suppressed and held back by the real enemies of independence.
I just wanted to say about Barrhead. Sorry, I just wanted to say about the BarrheadBoy piece. I think we're already too late for it to be a plebiscitary election. You'd have needed the SNP on side middle of last year in preparing for that. I think the interesting thing to take from his piece is that if the SNP win the election big, which we'll expect, and they get screwed around, and Boris says, by the way, I don't care how many elections you win, it's not a mandate for independence, and there's no danger I'm going to risk it being seen as a mandate for independence by actually letting you have a bloody referendum. At that point, I wonder if the SNP would have the balls to collapse the Scottish Parliament, just shut it down, resign as a government, and then ensure that nobody else can govern by voting against them. And at that point, there has to be another election within 28 days of the government falling.
Or Stormont happens in Scotland.
Well, I'd love to see direct rule from London. I'd love to see the English try and do that.
I'd like to see that. I think that would just be.
Frankly, I think you'd get opinion polls at about 75 to 80% for independence the minute Boris tried to tell us that we weren't capable of ruling our own affairs.
Look, the thing about the plebiscite route is it would be recognised by the international community because it would be a legal vote. It would demonstrate the sovereign will of the Scottish people, which is what's required.
Are you talking about the May election? It's not a plebiscite. It's a parliamentary. No. It's not legally a plebiscite. Europe will not accept it. The Spanish will accept it.
Well, if we collapsed our own parliament and there had to be another election and we declared it as a plebiscite, who wouldn't accept it? It's nothing to do with the Spanish government, the sovereign will of the people of Scotland. I didn't care if the Spanish government, which is particularly right-wing and rather fascist, has a problem with the Scottish people saying they want to be independent. I'd ignore the Spaniards completely.
Westminster won't accept it.
At the moment.
Westminster won't accept it. No. I mean, that's
what
the problem with this game. Well, the problem with the game that's been played to me is it doesn't matter if it genuinely is a plebiscite. It doesn't matter how many seats the SNP win. Westminster is in a position to ignore it. So, you know, BarrheadBoy and Peter are right. At some point, I'm coming round to we're just going to have to declare independence. Because
but then you are appealing to the international community, and you do need some sort of demonstration of the sovereign will.
Well, basically, you declare, what would you call it? No man's land. We want a referendum and appeal to the international community to support you in that. Or you declare UDI. Really, Westminster is going to agree to absolutely nothing. Why would they?
You're never getting a referendum out of them because they're far too scared they'd lose.
Okay, but
the fact that we got to 45% the last time absolutely put the shiters right up them.
Without a doubt. Can I just be a bit of a geek? He goes, the BarrheadBoy goes on to discuss the possibility of the unionist parties, in that case, not agreeing to unite against a plebiscitary election in May. They couldn't agree on not to stand against each other. And so therefore that might mean that there would be an enormous majority for independence.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that this morning, mate. Douglas, I'm too shite to be a referee, so I run the line, Ross. Did put out a tweet this morning asking Monica Lennon and Anas Sarwar if they would work with the Tories to stop the SNP, a unionist coalition, which I believe took about 37 minutes or so for both of them to get back to him saying, ram it. Which is the only answer they can give, really. I mean, the last time they got together with the Tories almost was the death knell of Labour in Scotland, so they're not going to make that. But even they're no stupid enough to make that mistake twice.
Jimmy, I'm not sure you're right.
Doug,
I actually think the people that still vote Labour wouldn't have a problem with it.
No.
You know that? Because they
Yeah,
problem with Better Together.
yeah, but both of them want both of them want to run the Labour Party, mate. The last thing they can admit, they can say, is that they would jump into bed with the Tories. That's a guaranteed. That's just handing the election of leader of the Labour Party to the other one.
I would say Sarwar's the only one I reckon would jump into bed with the Tories in the event of, doing Alistair Darling. You'll not get Monica Lennon doing that.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, she's clearly got some decent advice because she's had a Barry haircut. She's got a team round her because she's never looked that great.
Oh, First Minister, because you've got a good haircut. That's a good
No. Oh, she'll never be First Minister, mate. Come on, Labour will never occupy that office again.
Probably. In an independent Scotland, quite possibly. But it would be called the Independent Scottish Labour Party, the original Labour Party.
Why not just call it the Independent Labour Party and go back to the start?
No, because it's Scottish.
Well, let me give you a quote from BarrheadBoy before we move on. It's a bit inspirational. He says here, as I wrote earlier in this piece, it's inconceivable that the unionists could ever agree to a compromised position amongst themselves. We as a movement can and have in the past. Our cause is a righteous cause. Our fight is for our own nation. Our opponents fight for the betterment of another nation.
Aye, well, to paraphrase Randall Wallace in his line for Braveheart, we can agree on the colour of shite. There's no chance they could.
Even better. I'd like to. What? You carry on, Jimmy? Huh?
Yeah, I wanted to go to just the Joe Cherry letter to the Irish Times.
Yes, that's a good one, isn't it?
I thought that was a really interesting and an interesting choice to write the letter, and it was beautifully done. I think we sometimes get a wee bit stuck down the rabbit hole with the coverage that we're getting here and forget to look as to how it looks outside. The Irish Times and Fintan O'Toole in particular has always given the idea of Scottish independence, I'd say, a fair hearing. But Joe Cherry had a couple of issues with an article that he'd done at the weekend and wrote to them to tell them so. As I say, beautifully put, and just to remind people that she felt Alex Salmond was being airbrushed out of the history of the SNP, which is kind of ridiculous given the 20-year tenure of his leadership and the achievements in that time.
But he is having a nice interview with Nicola soon, which you can pay to join in and all the rest of it.
Alex Salmond.
No, Fintan.
No, it's Nicola. So probably, I should imagine, just a tad biased he is, yeah.
Well, Phil, we're not here to confuse the listeners. Fintan O'Toole is interviewing Nicola Sturgeon, yes?
Yeah. Fintan O'Toole.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right. I thought from the way you put it, Phil, it sounded like Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon were going to have a dispute. Well, let's be honest. You could say that Fintan O'Toole wrote that piece because it's like promoting your new book. He's got this big stage. It's a winter festival online. It's a big thing for Ireland. And it looks like Nicola Sturgeon is a star guest, so he's bound to puff. It's a bit of puff, to be honest, his article.
Well,
yeah.
If it wasn't Nicola Sturgeon, as long as it was someone else that would like to remove themselves from the influence of the English, Fintan O'Toole would be right behind you. So.
You're no far wrong, mate. There'd be West African leaders, there'd be Cubans, any revolutionary that wants to have a pop at the English is welcome on Fintan's wee programmes, eh?
I'd like to quote Joe Cherry on this because I agree. I remember being annoyed about it at the time, but I'm annoyed with myself that we didn't discuss Fintan O'Toole's article at the time. What she says here, it is not accurate to say that the roots of the SNP lie, in quotes, in a semi-fascist 1930s racialized nationalism. And as she points out, amongst the founding members were Robert Cunningham Graham, who was also founded the Scottish Labour Party. It was him and Keir Hardie that started the Scottish Labour Party. Alex Salmond himself was thrown out of the party for being SNP for being too left-wing.
79 group, yeah.
If you go back, you got to, was it Compton Mackenzie, regarded as a patriotic writer who served in British intelligence. He went on to defeat the notorious, he was a leading light of the National Party. He went on to defeat the notorious British fascist Oswald Mosley to become rector of Glasgow University. And even Hugh McDermott, which she admits did toy with fascism, but McDermott was expelled from the SNP for being a communist. So there's a huge case for saying Fintan O'Toole got that bit wrong.
Yeah, I just find it, as I say, it's interesting sometimes to see yourself as others see you. I quite like the Irish media for various reasons, and taking a look at some of the international viewpoints, the New Yorker or the New York Times or that is sometimes very useful. On that note, actually, just before we came on air, I seen a tweet from the bold Craig Murray, who is alleging that international journalists are finding it difficult to get permission to cover his trial. Apparently, the Crown Office have been asking them about their knowledge of Scottish trials, about their experience of Scottish trials. I wonder why the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal's Office doesn't want international journalists shining a light upon what they're trying to do to Craig Murray. Any ideas, chat?
Vaccine.
Well, actually, pretty much what they did to Assange. And actually, that's that far left New Labour leader. You know what I mean? That far left New Labour leader, Mr. Stormer. And it's true.
That's not who's attacking Craig Murray. It's
Craig Murray's getting done because of his looking at what happened to Assange. And if you go back and you have a look at it, you'll never believe it. It's all the thought of the British establishment, the secret services, etc. And I'm not paranoid.
I think Craig Murray has a different issue. He's been prosecuted for contempt of court for being a supporter of Alex Salmond, essentially, same as Mark Hurst, who's already been cleared completely.
I'd love to know who they're trying to knock back, though, Stuart. That'd be interesting, Is it Reuters? Is it the Press Association?
John Pilger?
Is it the Zimbabwean Free Gazette? It'd be interesting to know who is having a problem getting in to report on Craig Murray's case.
I think you might be swimming in the court waters.
Yeah.
Another topical one that we haven't headlined yet was we're not quite sure what happened at the SNP NEC meeting over the weekend. Apparently they had a meeting. There was a motion for a working party to be set up to discuss changing policy.
Yeah, this is a stooshy created by donuts who didn't actually read.
Yeah?
Yeah, basically, the NEC decided to sit on that motion specifically because of the meeting at the end of the month. And why would they bother setting up anything when the meeting at the end of the month is going to discuss exactly what this committee was going to discuss?
This is the National Assembly.
Yes.
That's fair. You could also say setting up a They see the case, the row was, you're right, so definitely a Stoogie, wasn't it? The row was, the story was that the new radicals who'd just moved into becoming members of the NEC had wanted this working party set up, and they'd been stymied by some arcane rule. But the thing is, if you set up a working party, that's another reason just to kick something into the long grass sometimes.
Yeah, as I say, the National Assembly is going to discuss all these things, and then the NEC will take on board what the National Assembly has had to say. So, as I say, it was a stooshy about nothing in reality. But folk online were getting very upset about it.
Do we know who's got access to the National Assembly?
I don't, but then I'm not a party member.
I think you can sign up and watch. I'm really not sure. No, you've got me there.
I was just thinking that if you can control the National Assembly, you control what the NEC could discuss.
I've not had emails telling me what to do from the branch office here in Leith. Have you?
I've had nothing for weeks and weeks.
Maybe that's because maybe we're shouting too loud and they just accidentally not posted our.
Just got the next branch meeting.
It's all virtual though. You've got to know when that is as well.
That's true.
Got to get the email.
Phone our MP.
Right. Well, one of the ideas when we sat down to decide what we were going to discuss today, we thought we might have our own version of reporting the COVID. Seeing as we haven't had a COVID briefing from the First Minister, this was your idea, Norrie. So, and are you representing the mainstream media again?
I think we should all ask a mainstream media question of you, Stuart.
Oh, okay then. I'll try and answer.
A mainstream media question of Stuart. Oh dear.
But about, let's
don't mention the Tories. That's all.
About the COVID, seeing as we didn't get a briefing today.
Okay.
So, can you explain to me, Stuart, why you, as Nicola Sturgeon, and Mr. Salmond have both not caught COVID? Did you get your vaccination earlier than you should have? Did you jump the queue?
I wonder. No, you. Well, it's just not true. There is no secret squad going around infecting my enemies.
Wrong. Hey, well, that was Jimmy's question.
Well, I to follow my mainstream media colleague Norman, can you, as Nicola Sturgeon, perhaps explain to me why you don't just let Boris run Scotland? Because clearly he's the better politician than you are, and he got more votes. More people voted for Boris than have ever voted for you. So I think you should step aside and let Boris run Scotland, because he's doing such a stand-up job at running the rest of the UK. Well,
unfortunately, we've got a restless population, which last time I appeared in public at George Square, I couldn't get away from the stage. I was surrounded by so many fans, so I think they might react rather violently to any idea like that.
Water cannon, water cannon. Water cannon them with vaccines.
Vaccination.
Phil? No. Dettol, get them with the Dettol.
Oh, charge on wire brushing Dettol. That's the Ouija way, eh?
Mr. Trump, while you're there, could you send me a pardon for something? Just
guys, can I just?
$2 million he wants for a pardon. $2 million apparently.
For the podcast, by the way, Phil suddenly changed into Donald Trump. That's what the was silent bit was. Suddenly, instead of his picture, we saw Donald Trump.
Guys, can I just point out, as I mentioned earlier, Monica done a piece today in the press with fancy new hairdo and all, in which she tries to put out a bit of space between her and Anna Sarwar on the question of independence. What she said previously was it was for the people of Scotland to decide. But what she's come out with this morning is it's most entertaining to me. She said that perhaps there should be a discussion about it, but it can't just, Labour should push a Devo Max position, because it can't just be a choice between a version of the Union and someone's version of Indie. So it's to be a version of the Union, someone's version of independence, and Monica's version of the Union, which would be Devo Max. So we'll have to have a three-way choice, but two of those choices have to be unionist choices, because that's the only way that they feel they can split the vote far enough to win it.
Devo Max still leaves you, whatever you call it, with 55 million in England, who know they're not Scottish, know they're not Welsh, and know they're not from the occupied territories in Ireland. You know, so it's still England. Call it what you like. You know, you can put lipstick on a peg. It's still a peg.
And you
can put lipstick on a peg, yeah.
Oh.
It's still an elephant in the bed. Sleeping with an elephant.
You're stealing
your bed,
quotes.
Stuart.
I missed that.
You're
How big's your bed?
You're stealing quotes again.
Well, I like that.
Anybody
else?
Hey, clock.
Because we've got to mind the clock a bit.
Yeah.
That's
Well, I think we should all knock off, get a cup of tea, a smoke, and then sit down and watch Baroness Ruth attempt to savage Nicola in Parliament.
You never know what she might say.
By the way, I noticed yesterday Nicola said that FMQs is on Wednesday. Is this a prominent move, do you think?
It's scheduled. Well, when I looked at the business program yesterday, it said yes, business bulletin. It was on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think it's just. I think Norrie. I think it's just for the moment for COVID. I think they just want parliamentary business to be Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I think they only want the MSPs in there on those 2 days.
They're quite happy to do committees virtually, because people can sit in their home and have do the committees on the screen. But yes, I think you're right, Jimmy. They just want them in 2 days.
Okay, call it a day at that, Stuart.
Yes, thanks very much for everybody. We will be back tomorrow. Thanks very much, Norrie Stewart, Jimmy Hutton, Phil Attridge, and my name's Stuart Lockhead. Bye for now.
Cheers for now.
Cheers for now.